Hi there, I'm Vicki PARFENOW from Aussie Stampers and Vicki PARFENOW Studio. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you a little bit about Linocut and how you can get started with some lino cutting techniques and the tools you might need for this. I'm going to show you the different products that are out there. This is the traditional grey lino, which has the hessian on the back. It's quite supple and it's reasonably easy to carve. I'm working on a piece here that isn't finished yet, but this will be a finished print once I have carved away particularly some of the background there, because it has a lot of this noise in the background or chatter, which is what I have in this stamp here. Now I have deliberately left some of this in my carved piece because I like the idea of this being a rectangular shape on a larger piece of card. There are different kinds of materials that you can get in lino cutting. So this particular one here, this is pink, and I believe this might be called, I think this is Speedy Carve. Speedy Carve. You can see it's very soft and supple. It's very simple to carve. It's a little tiny bit crumbly, I would say, around the edges here. You can see on the bird here, these little edges here were just not as fine as I would have liked them to be. However, I really do like this piece. It's a fun piece. I like that little bird. There is another material here which is called Easy Carve by Renoir. In fact, I have a packet here. I'll show you what the pack looks like. So this is an A4 sheet. They're under $20 a sheet, and you can get quite a lot of carving done from this. You can cut it down to whatever size you want. And in fact, this is what this piece is here. And this one as well. So these are the Easy Carve. This is a little ginkgo leaf that I carved. I'm going to show you how simple it is to remove some of the pieces on this. I've attached it to an acrylic block with some double-sided tape so that I can use it almost as a stamp. The main tool I use is the Speedball carving tool. I have other carving tools as well, but this is the one I go to time and again. I have 3 nibs in the back of it. I have a U-shape, which is a U-gouge, if you can see that shape there. I have a V-shape, which is a V-gouge, medium size, and then I have a very fine V-gauge. It's so small you may not be able to see that there, but it's tiny. I'm going to use the U-gouge, which is the bigger one, and show you how simple it is to carve away some of this background. This stamp, when I stamped it, has no background shapes at all. Here is an example of this piece. So you can see what's come out is the actual stamped image of the ginkgo without any background, any noise, any chatter going on. So I'm just going to unscrew the top of this a little and then pop the nib in there, tighten it up, make sure it's good and tight. And I like to store these inside the base. Here we go. So ready to carve away some of this outline in the back. So I'm going to bring the camera in so that you can see this a bit better. Now when you're carving, a tip is to have it on a flat surface and never have your fingers in front of the blade for obvious reasons. It's quite a sharp blade, and if you're using pressure, then you could cut yourself. But this is a palm grip, so you want to hold it in your palm. I like to have this finger out to help direct. You can put a finger on top, which helps with moving across your surface, and you can start putting pressure on now. And I'll show you how this carves away. So you can get quite large pieces out if you press down firmer. So if I hold this up here, you can see that I have a raised section here, which is what will print. I have some very fine lines, which I used with the finer tip of this tool. Here's another version of the Ginkgo, which I have printed 3 times with generational printing. So the first time it was inked up, I then printed without re-inking and printed a 3rd time without re-inking. So I got this little ghosting effect. And in the background, I just laid down some grass and I printed it onto a gel plate. You don't need a gel plate for working with Linocut, but I've found with the introduction of gel plate, I can actually get some fun results. This is a round gel plate here with my Ginkgo stamp and some generational stamping and inking. This here is my chop, which is my printer's chop, which is my signature, which I created from an eraser. And I used the fine tool of this tool to create my chop. And I want to show you, before I go on to the toadstools, which is my larger work, I want to show you some of the effects you can get with this type of carving method and how you can then do some hand colouring. Just move this up again so you can see a bit more of my surface there. So this is how it looks uncoloured, just with plain black ink. And this was one of the earlier birds that I did, and I needed to cut away a few of the pieces. This little piece on top of the head was quite rough. Some pieces down here I cut away further down the track. So ended up with being able to get a finer imprint of this little bird and do some colouring techniques. I printed this on a printed piece of card which already had been gel printed with some feathers, and here's some more feathers, and you can see that I masked off these areas at the side. So where these areas were, I made sure that these were masked when I ran the printing so that they wouldn't come through, because I wanted to get a square shape for my print as well. And this one's one of my favorites. I think it's quite dynamic. There's quite a lot of action there, and this one was really very pleasing. It's a very simple print. It's a very simple cut, this one. Nothing too involved or detailed about it, but it was one of the first lino cuts that I ever did, and I think it came out really, really well. I did love using this material, by the way, but it doesn't get as fine lines. You can see these lines are nowhere near as fine as the lines that I got with my Easy Carve material using the same tool. The lines there are much finer. Here's another one of these. You can see that the lines here are very fine as opposed to quite broad. So the material that you use does have some limitations if you're using this very speedy carve versus easy carve versus the grey lino. So I'm going to show you how I created, or am about to create, another print using the Easy Carve block by Renoir. And the tools of choice that I'm going to use, I have this beautiful Friscars knife, which I use to cut away the shapes around the block. But this tool here I'm going to use to remove some of the areas of the mushrooms that I don't want printed. Now, I have already created the picture and traced it onto my block. So I had this idea that I wanted mushrooms popping out of a rectangular shape. And so I created that using a pencil, not this one. I used a very heavy pencil for the graphite transfer. So this is only a medium pencil. I used a 9B for the graphite transfer and transferred it onto the block. And then I coloured it with a black Sharpie, which has kind of a blue tint to it. It's interesting how it's reading as blue, but that is actually a black Sharpie. And I'm going to change my nib, and I'm going to carve away some of the stems of this mushroom here, just to show you some of the technique. I'm going to go to the larger V gauge And these 3 nibs came with the kit. This was a Speedball Printing Kit. I bought it from Spotlight. It had some printer's ink and it had one of these pink blocks already inside it. So that was what got me started. That was the very beginning for me. And I'm only a beginner in terms of Linocut, but I am studying Lino at the art gallery every single week. So I know that I'm going to improve. So I'm going to remove this piece here. So to do that, I'm going to come in carefully. And you can see there's a zigzag on the left. So I'm creating a zigzag as I move my tool. Now I can straighten up because we're getting to the end. Now the only drawback with this material is you can't snap it off like you can lino. You can sort of push at it, and this is where I bring my Frisker's knife in to finish off anything that needs to be cut in a straight line. I'll just use my Frisker's to do that, just to get that line to pull out of there cleanly. Whereas with the lino, if you were to gouge some of your lino out, I'll show you the difference in that. And I'm working on removing some of this chatter in the background. Some of the lines will be gone, so this is a line I do want to take out. But what you can do here with the lino is you can actually snap the lino off. So if you wanted to finish there, you could push and it would snap off and you get a nice clean edge. But I can achieve something similar with using my Frisker's knife at the edge. So that will come out nice and clean. And I would suggest starting off with these blocks because this is where I'm starting. I have used lino before. I find these blocks are much quicker to carve, but you don't have the freedom of being able to do very detailed designs on them. They were quite limited by the fact that there are only certain things you can do with them. But when you start, I would suggest starting with whatever you feel most comfortable with. You can see the beautiful release that I get just using that larger V tool. And quite detailed lines around these detailed stems. And remember to carve away from you so that if there are any mishaps, you won't be injured. Now this area here with this V is quite a tight area, so I'm going to come in with my X-Acto, which is the Frisker's knife, and work into that edge rather than using the V tool, because I want to keep this line here, this line on the edge, which will be my border. And this is great for curving around small items like this smaller mushroom here. Just going to curve around it so that when I come to gouging out the line, there is already a release point. And the small V gouge would work beautifully for this too. But I'm using the medium V at the moment because there's quite a bit of area that I want to release from here. Now you can see I'm not digging in too deep. If you dig in too deep, you'll sort of impale your nib into your surface there. You just want to run it so that it's nice and easy to extract. Again, you can see that's a nice line that I'm creating there. You can see how well that's releasing because I've already carved into this edge with my X-Acto so it knows where it needs to cut. Now with these pieces I have used watercolour ink pads because they were what I happened to have at the time, and I'm going to create another one which will be a different colour using Distress Oxide inks. I'm going to go for a bright red, and this is one way you can print without a printing press. So I'm going to cover my image with the ink, and any areas like this you can see where I have maybe tilted that ink a little bit. I'm just going to rub off with some hand sanitizer just to remove the ink from that area so it's blotted and it's not going to cause any over stamping or over printing. So this is by Ranger. It's a Distress Oxide ink. It's a craft ink. I love working with it. It's got some really interesting qualities, and I'm just going to produce something for you now. So I have some Aquarello watercolor Artistico Fabriano 100% cotton, which is my favorite paper to use, hot pressed watercolor paper, and I'm going to create a greeting card with this print. Now I know I want my card to fold in half, so I'm going to do a bit of a fold so I know where to place the image, but I'm going to unfold it again so that I'm going to be stamping down on something that is flat. Now for this I also have a stamping pad which is from Stampin Up. It's a little bit like a mouse mat. That's going to give me a little bit of extra cushioning underneath. Equal even pressure, then lift it up, and that has stamped beautifully. I really like that. Now I have a technique which is a card maker's technique that I'm going to bring in and show you. If there are any areas of your Linocut that you're not entirely happy with, this stamped really well, by the way. I'm very happy with it. But if something had not quite captured the ink, you can use one of these colourless blenders. These are available from craft stores. This is a Stampin Up Blender. Many of you may know that I used to work as a Stampin' Up demonstrator for 7 or 8 years. And then I'm just going to bring in something there and fill in that line. And add a little bit more detail to that edge. I absolutely love how this has turned out. It's a really gorgeous stamp. It's quite evocative of a beautiful floral. And then if you have any spots like this and you'd like to kind of add a few more in, you can with this blending tool. Just tapping it into your ink pad and adding some highlights. That's kind of fun. So giving it even more interest. Now when you're finished, you need to wipe off that ink so that the next time you use the pen it won't be contaminated. So I'm just going to wipe it down on a paper towel until it runs clear. And I'm turning as I wipe so that the ink is coming off all sides of that nib. And now it's nice and clean. So that is with Distress Oxide ink. So that ink can dry pretty quickly. I'm going to turn over to the inside and I'm going to stamp a greeting inside, just with a regular greeting stamp. Now I like this nice greeting here. This is from Artistically Inked by Stampin' Up. And I'm going to grab that, peel off the backing, and I have another acrylic block, a smaller one, that I can pop that onto. And I'm going to make sure it's straight by setting it on my grid paper and lining it up on my grid paper here. or my grid cutting mat, I should say. Okay, and then I'm going to choose some black ink. So this fast resistant dye ink by Memento is Tuxedo Black ink, and I love this for stamping sentiments. I think it gives a really fine result, and I'm just going to ink that up now. I'm going to rub it across and then give it a few taps, and then I'm going to check that it's well inked. I could do with a little more on the side, and then just like I printed the ginkgo leaf on the front, I'm going to bring this down where I can see it's level, make sure everything's level on my cutting mat, and commit. Press without rocking and lift. And you can see that's given a lovely image of the word thanks. Okay, so I've given that time to dry. Now I want to give a nice fine burnish to this part of the line. I'm going to remove the stamping mat. I no longer need that, and I'm going to refold. I'm just going to fold it over back where I had scored it. And I'm going to line up the edges very closely on the front there. And then I'm going to use a bone folder. Now, if you didn't have a bone folder, you could use the edge of some scissors for this as well, but I do love a bone folder. It is one of my favorite tools for printing and card making and stamping and stamp carving. So interesting to be able to make my own stamps. It's something that I've wanted to do for a very long time. I worked making digital stamps for many years, which were downloadable stamps that I had created, but to have physical stamps that are just mine and no one else has that particular stamp, it's unique, makes me really happy. So there's the inside of the card. You can see how that's now starting to take the folding. Because it's heavy watercolor paper, you'll need to give it some extra burnishing. If this was regular cardstock, that would be much more easy to fold, but I do love the way this has turned out. My little ginkgo leaf and the word thanks inside. Thank you so much for joining me today with that little intro into beginners Linocut techniques. Some of the tips that I've picked up along the way. I'm still learning. I'm hoping to become a very advanced lino cutter at some point in time. It might take a few more years for me to get there, but I'm loving the journey. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye for now.